Welcome to Section 2, General Rules. It is your responsibility to understand and apply all requirements of the Canadian Electrical Code Part 1, including those not addressed in the training. Do you want to know how to take this course?
Hi, I am Arthur, your subject matter professional for this learning. I will help you to understand and be able to apply the requirements of the section of the Canadian Electrical Code Part 1.
The aim of this training is to provide new knowledge and to support the development of new skills that you can apply immediately to your job. The purpose is why you are taking this learning. To directly support the purpose, this learning has identified objectives. Here is what you will learn as you take this training. This training is divided into topics. These topics build on each other, so a best practice is to review them in the order they are presented. Save or print a copy of the Quick Reference Guide. It is located in Resources. Use this Quick Reference Guide to take notes and as a practical job aid for this code section.
Rule 2-024 covers approved electrical equipment that has been certified by an organization which is accredited by the Standards Council of Canada to meet the requirements outlined in CSA standards. The approved electrical equipment may also be covered in other standards that have been developed by standards development organizations, which are also accredited by Standards Council of Canada and other recognized documents, ORDs. In the case where CSA group standards do not exist or are not applicable, other recognized documents can only be used where they correlate with the provisions in the CE Code Part 1 and do not create duplication with the standards listed in Appendix A. The code also allows the regulatory authority to deem equipment approved for use in an electrical installation. In addition to being approved, electrical equipment needs to be approved for a specific purpose. For example, is the electrical equipment suitable for the specific application? Including the appropriate application classifications, ratings, and characteristics. Is the equipment approved for a specific purpose related to each condition of use when the equipment was designed, constructed, tested, and approved for installation in accordance with provisions of the code? The exception to the use of approved equipment has been added, specifying equipment described in Rule 16-222-1A. This rule exempts the equipment on the load side of overcurrent protection, transformers, or current limiting devices for Class 2 circuits operating at not more than 42.2 peak, with the exception of light products, electromechanical equipment, equipment for hazardous locations, and thermostats incorporating heat anticipators. In dry or damp locations, the following voltage characteristics are allowed to be used on Class 2 outputs without certification. For wet locations, where the devices are not immersed, the following voltage characteristics are allowed to be used on Class 2 outputs without certification. Electrical products that require approval, as stated in Rule 2-024, are approved in two ways. 1. Product certification by the Standards Council of Canada Accredited Certification Organization. Or 2. Field evaluations by a Standards Council of Canada Accredited Inspection Organization. Product certification is a process used by CSA that results in CSA granting the license to apply the CSA mark to a product, indicating that it complies with applicable requirements of the appropriate standard. Product certification is the provision of impartial third-party, accredited certification organization, attestation that includes the fulfillment of specific requirements that has been demonstrated. Approved equipment will bear a certification mark as an indication that the product is certified. Field evaluations bridge the gap between uncertified equipment and a code-compliant installation acceptable to the authority having jurisdiction, AHJ. CSA offers a solution that allows businesses to safely operate their newly installed equipment and assist jurisdictions to enforce their adopted regulations. A typical situation is equipment that is specialized made-to-order product. Yearly production quantities that are small, which is a requirement by the authority having jurisdiction, AHJ. The scope of the field evaluation program is not a certification service, is a safety evaluation on products to the applicable adopted standards with site-specific variances, is offered in support of approved products. The following marks are used for field evaluation in North America, Canada and US only. 1. Upon successful evaluation, the CSA technical representative applies a serialized field certification label to all products evaluated. Subsequent production inspections are not required. Alterations to design and materials are not permitted after product is marked with a label. All identified alterations must be completed before the CSA label is affixed to the product. The CSA marks denote the same level of approval as for regular type certification, except that a serialized CSA field certification label is placed on the product instead of the single mark. Equipment approved under this service is considered to be CSA certified and is therefore accepted across Canada and the US by the regulatory authorities. New marking requirements include short-circuit current rating or withstand ratings and the maximum continuous load permitted for connection to a fused switch or circuit breaker. The marking for equipment requires the nameplate to have SCCR clearly visible. The maximum continuous load permitted on a fused switch or circuit breaker, as determined in accordance with Rule 8-104, 5, and 6 is less than the continuous equipment shall be marked with the maximum permitted load. To avoid safety hazards for individuals working on electrical equipment, Rule 2-102 requires that any field markings required by the code should be done in both official languages in Canada, where it is required and enforced by the local authority having jurisdiction. When electrical equipment is marked with a short-circuit current rating or withstand rating, the equipment shall be selected for installation with a rating sufficient for the voltage employed and fault current that is available at the equipment terminals. Electrical equipment with a slash, which indicates a dual voltage rating, is referred to as line-to-line or line-to-ground voltage rating and is to be connected only in a circuit that is solidly grounded. Nominal voltage of any conductor to ground should not exceed the lower of the two values of the equipment voltage rating. Between any two conductors, the ground should not exceed the higher value of the electrical equipment's voltage rating.
Time for a scenario. Please read the scenario and follow the instructions to submit your answers.
Rule 2-130 specifies that insulated conductors and cables installed in buildings are to meet the flame spread requirements of the National Building Code of Canada or local building legislation. When electrical wiring and cables are not enclosed in a metallic raceway or not incorporated into armored cable without an overall non-metallic jacket, such as Tech 90 or ACWU 90, copper-sheathed RC 90, or aluminum-sheathed RA 90, it must meet the flame spread requirements of the National Building Code of Canada or local legislation to minimize the spread of fire within a building. The National Building Code of Canada deals with the removal of abandoned cables in plenums to keep the acceptable volume for flame spread and smoke development. Flame spread requirements for totally enclosed non-metallic raceways. When a totally enclosed non-metallic raceway is installed in a plenum of a building permitted to be of combustible construction, this type of raceway should meet, as a minimum, the requirements of an FT4 rating. When a totally enclosed non-metallic raceway is installed in the plenum of a building required to be of non-combustible construction, this type of raceway should meet the requirements of an FT6 rating. Rule 2-200 provides generic requirements for the safeguarding of persons and property from any hazard associated with the use of electrical equipment, and for the protection of electrical equipment from potential mechanical damage that could lead to unsafe operation. Electrical equipment shall be installed and guarded so that adequate provision is made for the safety of persons and property, and for the protection of the electrical equipment from mechanical or other injury to which it is liable to be exposed. Entrance to and exit from working space requires safe and quick egress from a room containing electrical equipment, which is required in the event of an arc flash or arc blast within the room. The rule requirements are for doors and gates in the unobstructed means of egress to open in the direction of exit travel, which include service rooms or working spaces containing transformers, overcurrent devices, switchgear or disconnecting means that have a nameplate rating of 1200 amperes or more, or that are rated over 750 volts. The most appropriate way of arranging equipment, so that if a fault occurs in the equipment, the egress route from the room or space does not pass by the location of the fault in the electrical equipment. The need to provide 2 egress doors from the room or space arranged in such a manner that a qualified worker would not have to pass by the fault location on the way to exit from the room. When such egress arrangement is not practicable, the equipment must have a minimum unobstructed working space of 1.5 meters. When a room is large relative to the required working space, the National Building Code of Canada may allow doors or gates located more than 7.6 meters away from the working space to open in either direction. Specific requirements pertaining to unobstructed means of egress can be found in Articles 33.3.1.23 and 9.9.5.5 of the NBC. The National Building Code of Canada should be consulted as to the limitations that any door swinging out from an electrical room may have to comply with. General requirements for maintenance and operation requires that electrical equipment in use or for future use is kept in safe operating condition. This includes the use of thermographic infrared scans to determine the condition of conductor termination on a circuit breaker. Electrical equipment that is not used frequently must be thoroughly checked before use. Defective electrical equipment must be disconnected or put in good order before it is re-energized. Rule 2-304 does not permit electrical work on energized equipment and requires complete disconnection of such equipment when work is being performed. This code requirement is consistent with the philosophy of work-safe practices mandated by applicable jurisdictional work-safe regulations. The rule also recognizes the fact that under certain circumstances, a complete disconnection of electrical equipment may not be feasible. In such cases, work on live, energized equipment may be performed, as long as all necessary precautions consistent with the nature and extent of the electrical hazards are taken to ensure that the work can be performed safely. When work is being done on electrical equipment, Sub-Rule 3 requires that safe work practices must be achieved by taking adequate precautions to prevent electrical equipment from being electrically energized when work is being done. Adequate precautions can include locking the disconnecting means in the off position and posting warning notices to prevent unauthorized operation of the disconnecting means, or using other equally effective means, including the use of temporary protective grounds. This code requirement is consistent with the philosophy of work-safe practices mandated by the applicable jurisdictional work, occupational health and safety safe regulations. A minimum working space of 1 meter with secure footing shall be provided and maintained about electrical equipment that contains renewable parts, disconnecting means or operating means, or requires examination, adjustment, operation, or maintenance. An exception to this rule indicates that working space is not required behind such equipment, where there are no renewable parts such as fuses or switches on the back, and where all connections are accessible from locations other than the back. The working space of 1 meter around electrical equipment with a rating of less than 1200 amperes and operating on a 750 volt or less system, as shown in the figure, is to be in addition to the space required for the operation of draw-out type equipment in either the connected, test, or fully disconnected position. The intent of the 1 meter working space is to allow work to be done on the equipment, but not the equipment directly opposite it at the same time. The working space of 1 meter around electrical equipment with a rating of less than 1200 amperes and operating on a 750 volt or less system, as shown in the figure, is to allow the enclosure doors or hinged panels to open a minimum of 90 degrees. When a room or space contains electrical equipment that has a rating on the equipment nameplate of 1200 amperes or more and operating at 750 volts or less, or any ampere rating and operating at over 750 volts, and consists of transformers, overcurrent devices, switchgear, or disconnecting means. This type of equipment shall be arranged so that in the event of a failure, it is possible to leave the room or space without passing the failure point. The potential failure point will be any point within or on the equipment. The working space around the electrical equipment is to be a minimum of 1 meter, as shown in the figure, is to be in addition to the space required for the operation of draw-out type equipment in either the connected, test, or fully disconnected position. However, due to the higher electrical ratings of the equipment, of 1200 amperes or more, when operating at 750 volts or less, or any ampere rating when operating at over 750 volts, the fault currents are also much higher, and therefore, to allow individuals in the room or space to exit safely, Rule 2-310-2 requires that you are able to leave the room or space without passing the fault point. This usually means there are to be 2 exits from the room or space. However, to protect personnel working on or operating equipment in the event of equipment failure or accident, Rule 2-310-4 requires that doors and gates in the unobstructed means of egress will open in the direction of exit travel. Where the room is large relative to the required working space, the National Building Code of Canada may allow doors or gates located more than 7.6 meters away from the working space to open in either direction. The National Building Code of Canada should be consulted as to the limitations that any door swinging out from an electrical room may have to comply with. Note, for additional information, refer to Appendices B and G. Article 3.4.6.16 of the NBC should also be consulted regarding applicable door release hardware. To provide access to the conductor connections for installation, servicing, testing, and maintenance for transformers rated greater than 50 kVA, a minimum horizontal working space of 1 meter is to be provided and maintained on the sides of the transformer that provide access to conductor connections. This working space is not in addition to the space required by Rule 26-242. Gases have the potential of explosion due to the possible release of gas through relief devices being too close to arc-producing electrical equipment. The clearance distances specified in CSA B149.1 between arc-producing and a source of ignition and a combustible gas relief discharge device, or vent, are as follows: 1 meter for natural gas and 3 meters for propane gas. CSA NEMA enclosure characteristics. Equipment enclosures vary in construction, purpose, and operating environment. Forms of enclosures are divided into defined categories, allowing for ready recognition and proper application. This rule lists the CSA types of enclosures intended for particular locations. The rule also allows use of enclosures of other types, as indicated in Table 65, as a substitute for enclosures indicated in the rule, provided that these other enclosures offer a degree of protection at least equal to that of the requirement of Subrule 1, and are marked as specified. The CSA mark for enclosure designations used in Canada is equivalent to the NEMA mark for enclosure designations in the U.S. Occasionally, electrical designers specify an NEMA type for any enclosures. Code users should be aware that the NEMA types do not represent approved equipment in accordance with the code, and that the enclosures must be approved by being certified to the applicable CSA standard, Part 2 standard, for enclosures. The Ingress Protection IP designation is a mark used outside Canada and the U.S. While the IP designation may be used in Canada, the enclosure must also bear the certification mark of an accredited certification agency acceptable to the AHJ. The IP designation is a 2-digit number. The left side number gives the protection against solid objects entering the enclosure, while the right side number gives the protection against the entry of liquids into the enclosure.
You covered a lot in this course. This summary helps you to recall the main concepts and requirements of this code section. You have now completed the learning on the main concepts and requirements of this code section. Next, you will take the open book quiz through the link on the course page. Click Close to exit, and then start the quiz.